right. Hello, hello, hello. Good afternoon and happy holidays, everyone. This is the ItCast Real Talk on Sex, and I'm your host, Nika Sherrill. The ItCast is our community outreach podcast that aims to increase diversity in conversations on health and sexuality. Through this work, we are creating a world where all people feel loved, honored, and respected. You can support the ItCast and all of the work we do by visiting theitcast.com and also subscribe to this YouTube channel and share with your community. This week's topic is Real Talk on Kink for the Curious. And we have Sylvie B in the booth with us. Sylvie of Sex and Sensibility is a Somatica Institute-trained sex and relationship coach with a background in neuroscience and a passion for women's health, sexuality, and the healing power of kink. All right, Sylvie, join us in the booth.
Hi, Nika. Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you for being here.
It's an honor.
Thank you. So first, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself.
So that intro was pretty spot on. So I'm Sylvie, and I am a relationship coach, and I have been trained in the Somatica method from the Somatica Institute, which is based here in the Bay Area, where I am based. And like you said, I have a background in neuroscience. I have also done some hypnotherapy in the past, and I do that sometimes still with clients. And I'm really about trying to bring them back into their senses. So whether that's, we all have five senses, and often we go through our day without really noticing them. And whether it's in sex, relationships, or even just enjoying your day-to-day life, coming back into your senses is a way to really up-level your experience and to just enjoy everything that little bit more by focusing in on it. So that's something that I do a lot of with my clients. I work with couples, I work with individuals, and I'm also a mom. I have two small children. So I talk a lot about how birth and pregnancy and postpartum has affected my journey, sexual and otherwise. And I'm always happy to help other women deal with the aftermath of that, because a lot of times society does not prepare us very well. It's just sort of a given, like a woman will give birth and then whatever. Like we don't really talk about the aftermath of that very much. So that is something that I work with a lot. Yes, and kink obviously is a big passion of mine. So I like to talk about kink for the curious, because we were all baby kinksters once, right? Yes. So anyone who's in the kink community got introduced to it somehow and found their way into it some sort of way. But a lot of people are hesitant, or they don't really know anyone who might invite them along to a play party, or who might induct them to the scene, and so they go to sources that may be a little bit questionable to learn about it. Yeah. Some of them found it on 50 Shades of Grey, or read some erotic fan fiction that they were like, oh, this is, and that's a great way to get interested, but it's not necessarily a great way to learn the right way to do things. So that's something that I'm very passionate about, is talking to people about kink and about how to get into it safely and cheaply and effectively, and how to bring these things up with their partners and so on.
I love that. And I really, I don't get it personally, but I have heard, and people have definitely told me about like the stuff that happens after pregnancy. And I'm like, that is real. I'm like, we have to do an episode on that actually. And I see where it can like bring you, like where you would need to be brought back into your sexuality and back into like your body in a way that's completely new. Yeah.
I mean, the medical community doesn't even take it seriously. I remember after, giving birth, it was, you go for your 6-week checkup and they tell you, yep, you're good to have intercourse again. And that's it. They just like check mark, you can. And so I did. I was very excited to go off and have intercourse again. I'd been waiting for a while, and it was awful. It was painful, and it was awful. And it wasn't how I remembered it. And I went marching right back into my doctor's office, and I said, "There's something wrong. There's something really, really wrong. It hurts. Like sex hurts." And he was kind of like, "Oh, well, you've just had a baby." And I said, well, you told me that I was cleared for intercourse, but there's something terribly wrong. I know my body, and it was not pleasurable. And he just kind of went, well, you're a mom now. And it's like, what?
Wow.
Sorry, what?
And what that points to is like painful sex for women is often disregarded as something that's normal and typical. And we don't actually step back and look at like, well, why is that? And what can we do to shift that conversation? It's just like, oh yeah, no big deal.
Yeah. And, shouldn't you be concentrating on your baby? You have a baby now. Surely that's what's important. Because this is how women get trivialized in today's America, in today's society. It's just, be a mom, go be a good mom and stop thinking about yourself, please.
Wow. Oh, mom shaming.
Yeah. So that's why I'm the woman who runs after, I see new moms pushing their strollers, and I'll run after them in the park and be like, hi, are you having painful sex? Are you still leaking? And they're like, I'm sorry, who are you? Leave me alone. Please leave me alone. And I'm like, you don't have to have painful sex. I hope you're not still leaking. You can fix that. And they're like, please back away. Please back away from me, lady.
Oh my God. But like, okay,
no
maybe not with strangers, but I love that. Help needs to be out there somewhere.
No one else is telling them. And I'm just like, like if you want to have a conversation.
Yeah.
But, and some of them do. And some of them are like, please leave me alone. And that's fine too.
So this is great. So I'm actually, well, you mentioned that like we were all baby kinksters. And one of the questions I have is like, what is kink and how does someone know they're kinky? Like,
I mean, so I posted a story about it on Instagram yesterday because I get that question all the time. Like people are like, how do I know if I'm kinky? And I'm like, do you think you're kinky? And they're like, I don't know. And it's like, well, talk to me about your fantasies a little bit, or like, talk to me about, I think as kids, we all kind of have some idea of our sexuality, and then we sort of have an idea of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And we hide parts of us that we think are not acceptable. So I definitely remember even like as one of my first experiences was watching Dracula when I was about 8 years old. Because, parents in the 80s, they just let you watch all kinds of crap when you're, I can't imagine today letting I have a 6-year-old. I can't imagine in 2 years letting him watch Dracula. But anyway, parents in the 80s were weird. And I remember watching Dracula and just having these feelings where I was like, I knew that I shouldn't tell anyone or ask anyone about these strange sensations that I was having as I was watching it. And then I remember the year later watching Edward Scissorhands, and again, sort of getting like,
sorry.
Yeah, right. Like that reaction. That's what I felt when I was 9 watching it. And I couldn't quite understand the odd feelings that I was like, I was very drawn to it.
Like the very first boyfriend I went out and found totally reminded me of Edward Scissorhands. It was like, yay.
Right?
Yep.
And, and then it just continued like, Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Interview with a Vampire and like all of those things that I just wanted to watch them. And if my parents came to the room, I would switch it off. Like, and I didn't know why. There was something about it that I was like, I don't want them to see me enjoying watching this. And I didn't even know what I was exactly enjoying. But I just remember that there was a feeling in me that someone shouldn't know that I like this because this is somewhat not acceptable. And I didn't even know what the not acceptable part of it was because it wasn't very linked to anything sexual in my mind yet at that point. I was too young to really know, but I just knew that there was something that I shouldn't tell anyone that was kind of shameful. And yeah.
What's interesting about that is that there is a realm of potential like sexual shame because it's like, if you are present to these things turning you on, but then there's like the religious and cultural shaming of like, well, they're fun, entertaining things, but if you get into them, then like it's a dark thing that you're not supposed to do. And like, so I'm hearing like it's actually pretty layered.
Yeah, but even, just I was fascinated with this whole, like, watching them getting their necks bitten and nobody seemed to not enjoy it. Like, they seemed to be like, no, don't bite me. Here's my neck. And it was like, all right. Well, she didn't really seem to not want that.
That's fair.
And and then I remember like there was a girl in my middle school, and she was this like weird goth kid. No one would talk to her, and I was also a weird kid. No one would talk to me. I wasn't goth, just no one would talk to me because I was a weird kid. And I thought like I really liked. I was very drawn to this goth girl, and I would sit with her every day at lunch, and she would ignore me completely. And she had a pet rat as well, which she would bring with her everywhere. And I would sit with her at lunch, and I'd have conversations with her, and she would just death stare me until I picked up my tray and left eventually. And one day she just sort of said, "Can I bite your neck?" And I was like, yes, yeah, sure, yeah, I would like that. That would be great. Right now, do you want to do? She was like, no. She was like, "I will come to your house and I will bite your neck for my ritual." And I was like, okay, yeah, you want to come like today? And she was like, "No, I will come tomorrow." And I was like, okay, fine. So she came around to my house, and my mom was like, "Sylvie, your friend is here." And my mom's face when this girl showed up. And I was like, okay, cool. And, she came up to my room, and we sat there very awkwardly on my bed for about 5 minutes. And then she said, "I'm going to do it now." And I was like, okay. And she, she like took my neck, and she didn't bite very hard at all. I didn't even have a hickey, literally. But, she kind of did that for a few minutes. And then she got up and she said, "Okay, the ritual is done and I'm going to leave." And then she did, she left. And I was like, so excited. I was like, that was the best moment of my whole life so far.
Yes.
In my whole life. It was like literally the most erotic moment of my like childhood. But I mean, these are those moments that I think back to when people are like, "How did you know you were kinky?" And it's like, well, probably that was probably a good indication. There was something there. And then you experiment with different things, and you're like, do I like this? Do I like that? I'll also get the question all the time. I'm like, I am kinky, but I don't know if I like pain. And it's like, first of all, we put up with a lot of pain every day in our regular lives. So don't tell me you don't like pain. Like we go for like deep tissue massage. Like, is that not painful? Like people are like, "Oh, it hurts so good, but I always go back." Like, okay, but then you're telling me you don't like pain and kink. It's like, what do you like? You get to choose your level. It's not
right.
Like you have to go in at a level 10 or anything. So those are always interesting discussions for me. And I'm always, because I didn't have anyone to bring me into that space, I kind of had to bring myself into it. And my poor long-suffering partner has had to deal with me going, "Can you do this to me? Or can we do this? Or can I do this to you?" And he's like, "Oh, no. Well, I don't know. Why? Why do you want to do that?" And so I had to do all of that awkwardness by myself. And because I'm an awkward person, I guess, and because I don't really care if other people think I'm awkward, that was fine. But there are a lot of people that do care, and that they are worried that their partner is going to judge them.
Yeah.
And that they're concerned that like the people in their life won't want them in their life anymore if they know this terrible secret about them, or if they know that they're interested in some things that may be out of the mainstream. And I don't want people to feel like that. I want them to feel like they're normal and they're beautiful and their desires are beautiful. And, the whole thing about kink is that you should be able to share your desires and needs with your partner or partners, or yourself even, and have them met. That is like the baseline of kink. No matter what your desires and needs are, there should be some way that you can get those needs met and be able to express them at least, and have that expression well received.
Yeah. We have a question in the chat. It says, "Kink is often tied to sex, but isn't really, is it? Not always."
No, kink and sex is not synonymous, just like kink and pain is not synonymous. You don't have to have sex at all to be kinky, ever. I tell people there's no kink police. It's not like somebody comes and is like, "Oh, well, we're going to take away your kink card now."
And there are sex police.
There are sex police.
You should do it that way. Don't behave that way.
Right.
People are constantly policing other people's sex.
Yeah, and that's so judgy. I mean, people do it in all kinds of communities. Like in the polyamorous community, I see it all the time as well. Of like, "Oh, you can only be poly this way, and this is not acceptable." And it's like, you know what? Does it work for you? Like, is it working for you? And are people choosing to be with you of their own free will because they're cool with what you want. And if they are, then great, then leave them alone. And, like all of these things about it has to be done this way and this way. And if you're not doing it this way, then you're not a kind of a proper polyamorous person. You're not a proper kinky person. It's like, that's very snobby. Yeah. It's very snobby and it's very elitist, actually. And people have the right to like what they like. And if they find other people who like what they like and like doing things that way, then that's amazing. And I want to celebrate all the people who found partners who love doing what they like the way they like it.
Yes. It's like, you're my kind of weird.
Yeah. And everyone has a my kind of weird, right? Like every pot has its
lid,
whatever lid. I was like, what does a pot have? A pot has
I almost said kettle.
Yeah, that word went through my mind too. And I was like, that's wrong. The pot does not have a kettle. Maybe it does. I don't know. But no, you don't have to have sex to be kinky. There are lots of people who are asexual who also define themselves as kinky. Kink is just what you mostly define it as. And it's very interesting because when you try and find a definition for kink, because it can be so broad, right? Like, I mean, BDSM sits under the umbrella of kink, but it's its own thing, right? Like BDSM and kink is not synonymous either, right? So kink is just this wide umbrella that it's like, like if you go back 10 years ago, maybe having sex with a same-sex partner was kinky, right? Like that was outside of the norm, right? Anything that isn't, heterosexual sex with one partner in the dark,
missionary style,
penis and vagina sex, like anything outside of that could be considered kinky to some people.
I love that you made the distinction that BDSM and kink are not synonymous and that one sits within the other. Because it's like when we hear something, our brain automatically goes to the stereotype of it. So it's like, oh, kink, that must mean whips and chains and planes and automobiles, like whatever it goes in the head. It's like, and those things are not the same. I also wanted to talk about like your perception of pain and like the pain scale thing. So like, I remember one time I was like hitting my thighs because they were kind of like knotted up and it was like they were really sore and tense. And I probably would have got a massage, maybe not deep tissue if I could have. And someone saw me and they're like, why are you beating yourself? Doesn't that hurt? And I was like, oh, they think I like pain. And it was such an interesting like thing to see like someone's perception. And I didn't even know how to shift it. I was just like, okay. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
And we all like pain to a certain extent. I don't know. Do you know that feeling of like sometimes when you have like an inflamed gum or something and you're flossing and you just like press the floss even more into it because you're like, it hurts so good to do that. I don't know. Like sometimes we lean into pain. There are definitely moments we lean into it. And don't tell me that people who train for like Iron Man and half marathons that they don't like pain. Like
right.
I run like 2 minutes and I'm in pain. Like those people are in pain all the time. They've normalized it as a feeling that they also find pleasurable. And also because you get a release of endorphins, which is the whole point, right? Like ask anyone in the BDSM community, like what's up with the pain thing? And they'll tell you because you get this rush of endorphins, which is the body's natural drugs that will make you feel high.
Oh.
And that's why people talk about like a runner's high as well. It's because basically those have kicked in.
Right.
And you can get those from spanking. You can get those from a lot of different activities, actually. And not all of them have to do with BDSM either. We all do things in our lives that give us that little kick of endorphins.
And you know what's interesting? You talked about working out and I was like, oh yeah, feel the burn and like, breathe through the pain and like all those different things.
Hurts so good.
Yeah, hurts so good. And so I'm like, yeah, okay, endorphins there. But then the other one that popped up was pain is beauty.
It hurts to be beautiful. My mom used to tell me that all the time. Such a toxic narrative, but okay.
And it's interesting, like, because we've normalized pain in that way where it's, and I don't know if you actually get endorphins from that kind of pain, but it's something that we don't look at as atypical or abnormal.
Right. And also pain is a judgment. Like not everyone, that's the thing. Like, it's something that our brain has decided, like from a neuroscience perspective, we've decided that a certain set of sensations to us very individually hurt, are painful. And our brain has made that. It's like, oh, if I get this sensation and this sensation and this sensation at the same time, I'm going to call it pain, right? But we get to decide, and that's when it comes back to somatics again. Just take everything, strip everything back from this big wide label of pain. Like we have this wide label of kink. We also have a wide label of pain. Like stubbing your toe is not the same kind of pain as like a slap, right? Like those, like if you think about the sensational differences, like what does it feel like? They feel very different. But then go back to the actual sensations. Does it feel thuddy? Does it feel stingy? Does heat radiate from the spot of impact? Does it feel achy? Is it intermittently pulsing? There's all kinds of things that, does it feel very cold? Like what if someone puts like an ice cube on your nipple? Like, what does that sensation feel like? And if you just go back into the sensation of what are the sensations, and are there any parts of this sensation that I actually enjoy? Like maybe there are parts of it that are intense. Maybe there are parts of it that I don't enjoy. Like there are certain types of sensation that I'm like, I don't love that type of sensation. But having a judgment on it immediately and being like, that's painful. That is a judgment. That is not a feeling of the sensation. And it's not discerning of the sensation.
And it's not a fact. That's
right.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. And you can change your pain scale. I actually remember, to bring it back to the childbirth thing again, I told my midwife when I was pregnant, I was like, I'm very afraid of childbirth. I'm very afraid that it's going to hurt. And she went, you're very afraid of sensation? And I said, well, it sounds like very painful. And she was like, some women have a lot of pleasure giving birth. I was like, that sounds like a huge lie. And she was like, no, I can show you videos of like women who have orgasmic births. And I was like, huh. And she's like, you get to decide what sensations you find pleasurable. And you get to retrain your brain. And the brain is amazing that you can retrain your brain to just find pleasure in various sensations that you might not have found pleasure in before, just by focusing on them. And just by, again, passing them and to the different little parts of like stinginess, heat, throbbing, pulsing, like whatever it is, and just being like, oh, it's this stingy sensation. It's not painful. It's a stingy sensation. Right. Is there anything I like about the stingy sensation? Can I lean into the stingy sensation? And that's what it is. And, there are some people who don't get anesthetic at the dentist's because they do self-hypnosis and they tell themselves, I am going to get through this with the power of my mind. And they do.
Yeah. I've definitely heard that, one of my brothers does that really well. Like it's a reframing of it. In the chat, we have someone who actually said that happened, that orgasmic birth, and that self-hypnosis conversation. So when you said that, I actually looked at it, I was like, oh, it's kind of like getting used to spicy food.
Mm-hmm.
I love spicy food, but the first time I had it, it was like, I'm going to die.
Yeah. And you have to just really find what part of it do you like? What part of it feels good? Even, again, if you get a mosquito bite or something and you itch it and itch it and itch it, there's a part of the itching it that feels kind of good. That's why you keep doing it, even though it's gonna just hurt more afterwards. Some people break skin scratching because there's something about the sensation that feels good, that feels like something you want to do. But again, if you take the sensation just as this blanket label and you're going to put a judgment on it, probably you'll find it less pleasurable than if you just get curious about the sensation. And that's what happens, when you talk about meditation and everything else. And they always say in meditation, don't judge your thoughts, just be curious about your thoughts. And it's what do you mean be curious about my thoughts? That's what it means. It means don't say, I'm feeling bad, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling, just get a little bit more granular about it Like I'm feeling heaviness in my chest and my heart feels like it's sunk into my stomach a little bit. And it's very hard to move my limbs because they just feel very heavy, right? Like that is a way of describing sadness that isn't saying I'm sad, because it's just getting a little bit more granular about those feelings. And we can get granular about any kind of feeling than just saying like, oh, that's interesting that my heart feels like it's in my stomach, because it isn't. Like hearts do not actually literally sink, but it feels like that. Isn't it interesting that it feels like my heart has actually dropped into my stomach? I wonder how my body does that. That's so interesting. And that already puts us in a different frame of mind, because we're scientists of ourselves. Then we're scientists of our own thoughts, and we're scientists of our own physiological process.
Wow, that's very real. I've definitely like, and we've all felt those sensations, like there's not really butterflies there, but like,
right.
To feel the emotion and then to label the emotion. And I think labeling it actually isn't as granular as the feeling it. Like, I don't like it. There's a dissection. That's really cool.
And there are tricks, like public speakers use them all the time to reframe your sensations. I know that when people do public speaking, if you've ever watched Tony Robbins, like he looks like a crazy person before he gets on stage, and he jumps on his trampoline and he beats his chest, like, and it's like, okay, cool, man, chill out. But that is, he tells himself that he is pumped. Mm-hmm. Other people standing in that situation might tell themselves like, oh, I have stage fright because my heart is beating, my cheeks are flushing, my adrenaline is high. I have this tingling sensation throughout my whole body. I'm sweating. And so someone might say in that situation, I have stage fright. I am terrified. And someone else, like Tony Robbins in that situation or whoever, will be like, oh, I'm not terrified. I'm pumped. Because it's they're the same set of physiological reactions that happen. It's the interpretation that's different.
I'm totally taking a page from that playbook. Like I've heard the like, oh, nervousness is excitement, and that there's some reality to that. And I feel like that's kind of like the little kids version of like this shift in total paradigm and being able to step back, see it, and allow it to be something else.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Be curious about it and ask yourself, like, am I actually nervous or am I just really pumped?
Right.
And then you get to decide. You get to decide like, no, actually, I'm pumped. I'm actually pumped. Because it's same set of physio, like it's exactly the same thing. Your brain is just asking you the question. It's like, oh, the body's sending me all these signals. Quick, I need to make a decision. What am I? And if you let your brain tell you like, I'm terrified or I'm in pain, your brain will be like, okay, let's go with that. And if you're telling your brain like, oh, I'm actually having like intense sensations right now and I enjoy them, your brain can be like, okay, cool. Like your brain doesn't have time. It's doing a lot of different things. Like the brain is doing so many things at the same time. It's actually just looking to you to give it an instruction. Like, what should I be feeling right now? And then you tell it, it should be feeling really good. And the brain's like, okay, cool. And then it moves on to the next task. You have to lead your brain or your brain will lead you. And your brain doesn't have time. It will just choose the nearest label it has. And if that nearest label is pain, it'll take pain and it'll slap it on almost everything.
Wow.
So you lead your brain and you'll find that your pain scale actually, your tolerance will dramatically increase.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right. So those are some tips.
Yeah.
And so I want to shift to the topic of negotiations. Like we're near the holidays. And one of the things I put out there is like, well, what do you want for Christmas?
Well, I am a big proponent of not having to spend tons of money to show people that you love them all the time. I think we're in this culture right now where it's like, if you're not spending this amount of money or if you're not buying something very expensive, then you clearly don't care for this person. It's like, you know what I want for Christmas or for Hanukkah in my case, because I'm Jewish. But all I want is for my partners to tell me their fantasies. Like, I feel like that's such a gift. If if my partners sit me down and they're like, all right, I'm going to tell you a fantasy I've never told anyone before. Like, I would rather that than like any amount of like expensive perfume or jewelry or diamond, whatever. Like, I don't care about any of those things, but the gift of a partner telling you exactly what they want and what they love and what turns them on, that is a gift.
Wow. That's real. Like it brings about more intimacy.
Yeah.
And like that's something that lasts.
Yeah. And imagine being able to also share your fantasy, like share a fantasy that you've never shared with anyone, with someone, and how that would feel for you too. Like to feel like this person, to have it received and have that person be like, oh my gosh, that's hot. Oh my gosh. And like that feeling, like I can even imagine it now, like being able to share a fantasy with someone and for them to see their eyes light up and to see them being like, oh my gosh, that's like the hottest thing I've ever heard. To have that validation of a fantasy, that's a gift for everyone wins from that gift.
Yeah.
Like, that's the gift we should all be giving each other for the holidays. Like, just tell someone something meaningful and have it well received.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. So what do you do in response to someone's fantasy if it's not your thing?
So never yuck somebody's yum, right? So if, and there's lots of things that people aren't necessarily into. Some people, I mean, I'm not going to yuck anybody's yum. There's all kinds, you go on FetLife and you look for a fetish and I guarantee you will find it. Like there is a fetish for everything.
100%.
Like, drinking tea is probably a fetish to some people.
It is. I have been to tea ceremonies. It totally is.
Yeah, right? Like there's a real slowness and sensuality about it that can be very hot. But there's a fantasy for everything, for everyone. There's a kettle for every pot, as we like to say. Or a lid for every pot even. But no, I mean, there's so if somebody shares something and it's just not for you, you could just say something like, wow, I can see how that's super hot for you. Like, tell me about why that's hot for you. Because you're not saying like, oh, that's super hot for me too. You don't have to lie. You don't have to be like, I'm going to fake like loving this fetish or whatever that I'm not into. But you could be like, oh, that's so interesting that you're into that. Like, tell me more about that. Like, how did you get into it? Be curious. Like, that's why I call my course Kink for the Curious, because curiosity is the most attractive thing that you can ever find in another person, because everyone likes to talk about themselves and everybody likes to tell you their origin story, right? Like their superhero genesis story, like, why am I how I am? And if you're not into something that someone wants, then you just ask them why they're into it. And that's also validating, because then they get to like explain something, or even if they get to say like, I don't know, and you could be like, but it's so interesting. Wow, it's so interesting that you shared that. And thank you for sharing it. And I feel so much closer to you now, knowing that about you and that you felt safe enough to share that with me. That makes me feel very close to you.
Yeah. So tell us about the Kink for the Curious course.
So it launches in mid-January. And it's really been a labor of love for me. I started out because, a few of my friends and I were talking about Kink for the Curious, and all of them were saying like, oh yeah, it's been really hard to get into that community. Like, first of all, it's very expensive. There's a lot of classes. They're typically geared towards more advanced people for a start. Second of all, they cost money. Like any of these courses, and not everyone has the money to like go to a workshop on choking, on safe choking, or, like vlogging or whatever else. And then you have to actually buy the equipment, and people are like, wow, being kinky is expensive. And I was like, no, it isn't. It doesn't have to be. And then I sort of went on this mission, and I would just go on this rant about it all the time. And I actually met a journalist who was like, oh, I want to write a piece about it. And I was like, sure. And I gave her this whole info, and she was like, okay, I work for Cosmo, and Cosmo wants you to do a webinar on this. And I was like, oh my gosh. Like, so did one of those. And then I was like, okay, well, now I have to come up with this course. So I started, doing this, and people just responded so well to it. And I'm really lucky that I actually don't have to pull it off completely alone. So I have a really incredible course co-creator by the name of Sweet Pea. She's actually an internationally renowned burlesque superstar and dominatrix, although she goes by Queen P in the dominatrix space. And she actually pioneered Minneapolis's neo-burlesque movement. And she not only performs there in the US and worldwide, but she also mentors tons of performers. And she runs these amazing Kinky Friday events every month. And she took these events they were founded by latex legend Jean Bardot. And she handed it over to Sweet Pea. And when Sweet Pea got these events, they had about 30 to 40 people every month. And Sweet Pea has now taken them to 300 to 500 people shows. Wow. And she makes them very, very accessible to any level of kinkster, even people who've never done anything kinky before in their lives, and even people who maybe just want to watch. Maybe they just want to go to a show and watch someone being flogged. Maybe they don't want to be on stage. Maybe they don't want to have anything done to them.
Voyeurism is definitely a kink.
Right. And it sort of provides this low risk environment where you don't actually have to do anything. It's like burlesque, right? Like you can go and enjoy watching a burlesque show without, having to say like you went to a strip club or that you enjoy strip tease, right? Like it's sort of like this more accessible way for people to get into it, where they can be like, oh yeah, that's something I like and that's something I enjoy, but it's like lower risk for them.
Yeah.
It's more socially acceptable. It makes them feel like they can do it without having to, to expose themselves too much. So I'm very lucky to have her as a course co-creator with me. I'm super psyched to be launching this course in January. Anyone who wants to, and it is for the newbies. It is not for people who have dabbled in BDSM in the past. And no, it's not. It's for people who they don't even know how to articulate their fantasies yet. And we go through that too. Like, how do you tell a partner that you might have some kinky desires? Let's practice how you say that. Let's practice getting comfortable with what you actually want. We talk about the yes, no, maybe list, right? Which is a thing that we all know about in the kink community, but people outside the kink community don't know about yes, no, maybe lists.
Right.
And so it's like introducing those. And what are the feelings that you want to feel during a session, not just during sex, but like, why are you drawn to certain things? Let's talk about the feelings that you want to get. Some people call them kernel kinks. In Somatica, we call them core desires. What is your core desired feeling to have? Do you want to feel worshipped? Do you want to feel humiliated? Do you want to feel used? Do you want to feel, there's all kinds. Do you want to feel loved? Do you want to feel connected? Do you want to feel, there's all these feelings that we go to that, in our lives, but we never name it. Like, why do we want to feel a certain way?
Yeah.
And so we get really granular about that in the course. And just from that, then we go into, okay, now let's talk about your desires. Now let's talk about how to ask for those desires. Now let's talk about how to negotiate these things safely. Now let's talk about things like safe words. Now let's talk about just all of these things that are very basic. And for some, practitioners, that's a little boring. They're like, why do you want to work with total newbies? And it's like, I love working with the newbies. We're all newbies.
Yes, exactly. And like, I love the Kink 101 space, because when someone is brought into the community with an understanding of the community, less harm is caused for them and for the people that they're playing with. And it makes a huge difference. I would love to get that info out to the listeners and the people in the chat as well. So like, Queen P and the parties and all the jazz.
I will be filming with her next week. I'm going up to Minneapolis and we're going to be posting a lot of behind the scenes footage. So if you follow my Instagram account, all of the information on the course, I'm also running a Kink Advent calendar for every day of December, where we post BDSM tips and kink tips and lots of information about the course. And so for every day of December, there's going to be another little kink tidbit to post. And next week when I'm in Minneapolis, we'll be posting a lot of, like dungeon things, and I'm sure Queen P herself will grace us with some kinky tips on there as well.
Beautiful. So in the conversation around like the Kink 101 and understanding the language and the environment and the rules, I want us to spend a little time talking about consent. Like, really just creating that conversation for understanding that kink is a completely consensual conversation.
Yes. And it's ongoing, and not just kink. I mean, everything. So, we were talking the other day, you and I, Nika, and I was telling you about my boys. They're 4 and 6 years old. And when they play with each other, because we've taught them the language of consent. And so they have very strange conversations where one of them will say, do I have consent to play with your Captain America? And the other one will say, only if I have consent to play with your Batman. And then the other one's like, well, you can play with my Batman, but the rule is you can use my Batman only for 2 minutes. And that is like, and then the other one will be like, I agree. And then they'll go off and they'll play. Right. Or sometimes when they're roughhousing with each other, they'll use their safe word. So, and they have a safe word with us and they have a safe word with each other because, we always tease them. We're always like, ouch is not a safe word. If you want to use your safe word, use a safe word. Or like, no is not necessarily good. It's not a good safe word. And so, when you're tickling a kid, you tickle them and they can be like, no. And then if you stop, then they're like, keep tickling me. And you're like, but you said no. And they're like, keep tickling me. And you're like, right. Well, then you really need to have a safe word so that I really know when to stop tickling you. So they do now. So my kid's safe word it's not a particularly good one in my opinion, but I'm not going to judge them. Their safe word is quit. So they say no if they don't mean no, but they say quit when they really mean quit. So, and if kids can learn the concept of consent and safe words, then adults can talk about consent. And I get a lot of couples who are like, oh, but it's not sexy. Like, if I have to stop and ask for consent all the time, it's going to kill the mood. And it's like, what kills the mood? When you're doing something that your partner doesn't like and it's not consensual anymore. That's a real mood killer right there.
And they don't know how to tell you. Yeah. They don't know how to communicate that. And I read this article that was like, consent is mandatory. Like if it's not there, and if you don't know whether it's there or not, then you're not actually in a conversation around consent. Like,
and it's ongoing, and you have to keep asking. There was a brilliant campaign in the UK a couple of years back, which had something. It was called something like "Consent is like a cup of tea," right?
Oh, yeah.
Those videos where it's like, you ask someone like, "Hello, would you like a cup of tea?" And if that person's like, "Yes, I would like a cup of tea," then you make them a cup of tea. But if you give them the cup of tea and then they're like, "Oh, I've changed my mind. I don't want the cup of tea," you're not like, "Drink my tea. I made it for you, drink it." Like that's rude. Or if the person fell asleep before you got them a cup of tea, you don't open their mouth and pour the tea into their mouth while they're asleep. That would be very strange. So you have to think about consent in the same way that you would think about, somebody saying like, "Yes, I'd like a cup of tea." They have the right to change their mind. They have the right to fall asleep. They have the right to only drink half of the cup of tea that you made them. They, like they have the right to take a sip of the cup of tea and say, "Oh, I don't like this cup of tea." That's fine. All of that is fine. Like, and there has to be like an ongoing dialogue. Like consent is just a dialogue. When people tell me they don't want to have an ongoing consent conversation because it's not sexy, that to me is just like, oh, you don't want to have a dialogue with the person you care about, because that's what consent is. It's an ongoing dialogue.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And it's communication. It's like you don't want to be in communication. You don't want to be connected with whomever you're partnering with.
Yeah. And that's not sexy.
Not even a little bit. See, we talked about the elitism. Oh, sorry.
I love watching you get excited. Makes me excited.
Can we talk about scavenger hunts and pervertibles?
Oh yeah, pervertibles are some of my favorite things because like we said before, kink can, people have this idea that it can be very expensive, right? That you have to be Christian Grey with a dungeon and a red, his red room, and it's probably fully stocked of like, and people will tell me all the time, like, should I buy like the buffalo flogger or the cowhide flogger? And I'm like, I don't like, it doesn't matter. And they're like, because the buffalo one is like $100 more expensive. And I'm like, this is your first flogger. Like, why do you like, I don't understand. Like, we have it in our minds that these things have to be so expensive, and you don't actually need any equipment to be kinky. You don't need any. And when I tell people that, they're like, "Oh, but like, what if I really want to like have those claws that I can use on my partner's back?" And it's like, do you use utensils when you eat? And they're like, yeah. It's like, oh, so I assume you have forks in your house. And they're like, yes. And it's like, interesting sensation. The feeling of a fork going down your back is like the nails, the claws that you can buy, the same kind of sensation, really. Like, go get a fork and then see if your partner even likes that sensation before you would invest in like a bunch of Wolverine claws. Like, there's so many things around our houses. Electric toothbrushes. Do you know how many things you can do with an electric toothbrush that feel interesting?
I can imagine.
Yeah. I mean, maybe you want to get a replacement head for it after you've tickled your partner's balls with an electric toothbrush. But, maybe you don't. I don't know. Maybe that's your kink. Maybe you make your partner brush his teeth with his electric toothbrush after you've used it on him. I don't know. Just make sure that you're like washing everything properly afterwards. But there's a lot of things that you can find in your house, that don't cost anything because you've already got it. Yeah. And, you don't need to be going out and spending hundreds and hundreds or even thousands of dollars on equipment when you have a bunch of stuff in your house that you can use. Pop some ice in the freezer and see how that feels. Yeah. Right? Like, there's a lot of things that you can do with just, I actually challenge whoever's watching right now, like, make a very quick list of like some things that you've got on your desk right now that might feel really interesting as a sensation on yourself or on your partner. Maybe, I don't know, like even pens, right? Like a lot of people are into like, writing things on their partner. Like, so you can like, you can.
Sorry, you just gave me ideas.
There's all kinds of like interesting things, lotions, you could like put lotion in a lot of people have like aloe vera or whatever, like pop it in the fridge and then take it out and then write your name on your partner's back in lotion.
Wow.
Or like the knee pit. The knee pit has so many nerve endings in it. Like anything you do to the knee pit feels like crazy. But there's so many different things that you can do that just create a ton of sensation without having to spend a dime. Yeah. Dirty talk can be really kinky and doesn't cost you anything.
That is fair.
Yeah.
I was in a dungeon a week or so ago, and it was one of those fancy ones, but I saw someone with a rolling pin. It was like the kind that don't have the handles, but I was like, I know what that is.
Yeah.
And it's so cool. It's like, you're right. You can just you can stumble across anything that could be pervertible. Like, there's a bunch of options. I'm going to try that fork thing too.
Yeah. You have slippers at home. Usually they're like soft and whatever. Like, you can slap someone with a slipper and that can feel kind of interesting. You have a bathrobe. It probably has a thing to tie it, right? You can tie someone's hand, or a tie, right? Like, you can have a male partner or a partner who wears ties, right? Like, you can get a tie and like tie them up with that. You don't necessarily need to go out and buy fancy restraints or anything else. Like, you just use what you have. And that's interesting together. And you can also, do a pervertible scavenger hunt at home, like where you and your partner have like 10 minutes to gather, like, however many things, and then you try them out on each other. Like, make it fun, make it an activity that you do together. That can be so much more connecting, so much more interesting, so much more creative than, just going on Amazon and buying like the latest fancy equipment and whatever. Like, you can do that too if you want to, but you don't have to. And it doesn't make you a better kinkster if you do.
I love that. Absolutely love that. All right. On that note, is there like, what else can we share about? I did have another question. Oh, the scavenger hunt. Okay. So I love what you actually brought up about that, because what it brought to mind also was that negotiating and fantasy sharing. It's like, go get things that you're like, you want to try and see if your partner wants to try them too.
Yeah. Because sometimes we don't know what we're into until we're even asked. I mean, it's like food. Sometimes like we know what we like because we know what we eat. But sometimes someone's like, ooh, here, try this. And then, sometimes if you know what it is, you're like, no, thank you. I don't like that. But if you don't know what something is and someone's like, here, take a bite, and you taste it, you're like, that's really good. Like, what is that? And then they'll tell you and you're like, that's interesting. I didn't think I would ever like that. But you don't know until you try. Like, and sometimes you do taste it and you're like, oh, not for me. Okay, cool. But again, like, experiment, try stuff, figure stuff out together, be a team. Like, that's what I always tell the couples who come to me, like, be a team, because that is sexy and fun. I mean, when we talk about play, like, in the kink community, it's like, there are play parties and like all of these things, they center around the word play, because that's what this is. It's play for adults. Kids know how to play and play all the time and do it very unabashedly with no shame whatsoever. I mean, that is what they do. They play. And as adults, we kind of lose that sense of fun. And it's kind of like, oh, like, what do you do for fun? Like, oh, I train for half marathons. Oh, for fun, I like, go and play golf with my friends. Like,
I read books and
yes, I do crochet, and it's like, great, cool, all of that's great. But like, what do you do for fun? Like, how do you have fun together? Like, what do you have fun together doing? And then like discovering that, like, what is fun for us to do together? And not just like, you can get these like date night kits and all of that. And I always find that like really, again, it's expensive. You just have to like, you can do so many things at home for free. And like, you can play wrestle at home. You can like, go on scavenger hunts at home that you've created by yourself. You can like tie your partner up and play a game of like, what am I dripping on your back? You can do all kinds of things that are really great fun, and they don't have to be expensive at all.
Yeah. I love what you're saying about play, and I'm getting like, play is not the same as stimulation. Like, a book can be mentally stimulating, and that's great, but how playful is that? It's like, I laid in the grass one day and just like looked up at the sky, and I was like, I haven't done this since I was 6. Why don't I do this more? Like,
yeah, just the simple pleasures of everyday life. Even just, making yourself s'mores, or like lighting some candles in your living room and making yourself s'mores over that. That's like a very pleasurable. You don't have to have a bonfire to do it. You can do it by yourself. Like, there's all kinds of things that you can do to bring like a little bit of magic back into your life and into your life, into your living room. Just little sensual moments, have a shower together and like give each other Santa Claus beards and laugh hysterically. Like, just laugh together again. Just laugh on your own. Laugh with your friends. Like, bring pleasure and fun back into your life, because we're so serious. And I know we've just lived through a global pandemic and the world is falling to pieces and there's a lot to be miserable about. But that's why in these times we have to try even harder to find our joy and to find the small things that make us laugh like children, that make us look ridiculous, and that make us smile, and that have a pillow fight, randomly surprise your partner with a Nerf gun when they come home from work, like shoot them in the face with a Nerf gun, like, I don't know, and then run away screaming. Like, these things are funny, they don't take a lot of investment. It just takes a lot, it just takes the will to want to have fun again.
Yeah.
And we all need to have a bit more fun.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Sylvie. Is there any other resource or tidbit that you want to share before we wrap up?
I mean, I think you're an amazing resource, and I think people should definitely be watching your podcast, because, you bring together an amazing number of people who talk about such incredible topics, and, you yourself are so inspirational. So I think that my top tip would be that people should definitely watch this podcast and participate and ask questions and send things in to expert. Just ask. If you have a question, ask. There are no dumb questions. I tell my kids that all the time. Like, if you want to know something, like, feel free, just message. And I'm always happy to talk about kink. I'm always happy to talk about childbirth, about body image, about any of that. And I'm sure that you have things that you love it when people ask you about them too. So that's my main tip for everyone is be curious, ask questions, message people. Don't be afraid to sound unknowledgeable or ridiculous or whatever. We all sounded like that once. I still sound ridiculous very often. Very often. I'm sure I'll probably rewatch this podcast and be like, oh God, I sound ridiculous. Okay. Well, that's life. We all sound ridiculous and we all look ridiculous often. Like, get used to it.
Yes. Oh my God. Thank you so much. And thank you for being on the show.
Yeah, this was amazing. And thank you so much for having me.
All right. Thank you, everyone out there who is joining us today. The ItCast is our community outreach podcast that aims to increase diversity in conversations on health and sexuality. Through this work, we are creating a world where all people feel loved, honored, and respected. Support the ItCast and learn more about our work at theitcast.com. And as Sophie said, subscribe to this YouTube channel, watch the podcast, tell everybody you know. We'll see you here next week.